At the reading of my father-in-law's will, the air turned to glass. "Why is she here?" my husband's sister spat. The lawyer adjusted his glasses. Article 7. To the woman my son betrayed. My breath caught as he handed me not a check but a key. The exact same one I'd watched my sister-in-law bury in her garden 3 years ago. The moment the key appeared in Mr. Harrington's weathered hand, the air in the room crystallized. I could almost hear it crack like thin ice beneath heavy boots. My lungs seized mid-breath as recognition slammed through me. That small, rusted piece of metal wasn't just an inheritance. It was a detonator. I hadn't planned to attend the will reading. After a year of cold shoulders and calculated exclusion from the Blake family, I'd nearly convinced myself to stay away. But something, perhaps Colton's voice in my head, perhaps my own stubborn pride, propelled me to the law offices of Harrington and Associates that rainy Tuesday morning. The reception area of the firm exuded old money with its dark mahogany panels and leather-bound law books nobody actually read. I arrived 15 minutes early, my heart hammering against my ribs as I smoothed non-existent wrinkles from my black dress. Professional. Dignified. The opposite of how they expected me to behave. "Madison." Blake's voice sliced through the quiet as he emerged from the hallway. My husband of 6 years barely met my eyes, his gaze sliding past me like I was a shameful secret. "I didn't think you'd come." I straightened my spine. He was my father-in-law. Was being the operative word. Caitlin appeared behind him, her designer heels clicking a precise rhythm that matched the throbbing in my temples. Her eyes, the same shade of coffee brown as her brother's, swept over me with clinical disdain. "This is family business." "I am family," I replied, the words feeling hollow even as I spoke them. Caitlin's perfect red lips curved upward, not quite reaching a smile. "Are you, though?" Mr. Harrington's assistant appeared before I could respond, ushering us into the conference room with hushed efficiency. The atmosphere felt like a funeral, technically over, yet heavy with unprocessed grief. Blake kept a calculated 3 feet between us as we settled into the polished chairs. His cologne, once comforting, now smelled like a stranger's. I hadn't seen Colton since his collapse at the factory warehouse 11 months ago. The memory flashed vividly, his imposing figure suddenly crumpling amid stacks of inventory, his gray eyes locking with mine across the floor for one startled moment before the chaos erupted. The heart attack had been massive. Unsurvivable. I'd tried to visit him in the hospital, but somehow my name never made it onto the approved visitors list. Mr. Harrington cleared his throat, drawing my attention to the present. His silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses gave him the appearance of kindly wisdom, though I knew better. 30 years as the Blake family attorney had made him loyal to a fault. "We are gathered today to execute the last will and testament of Colton James Blake, Sr.," he began, placing a thick folder onto the table with ceremonial precision. I felt Blake shift beside me, his shoulders squaring as if bracing for impact. On his other side sat his uncle Richard, Colton's younger brother, thin-lipped and impatient. Across from us, Caitlin sat with her husband Derek, their postures mirror images of entitled expectation. The proceedings dragged through predictable allocations. The family estate to Blake. The summer property to Caitlin. Investments split 60-40 between the siblings. Trust funds for the grandchildren. Charitable donations to the Veterans Foundation and local hospital. Richard received Colton's vintage car collection. Longtime employees were remembered with generous severances. My name remained conspicuously absent. With each bequest, Caitlin's smirk grew more pronounced, Blake's jaw more rigid. I kept my expression carefully neutral, wondering why I'd tortured myself by coming, when Mr. Harrington adjusted his glasses and turned to the final page. "Article 7, he announced, his tone subtly different. "To the woman my son betrayed." The room froze. Caitlin's head snapped toward me, her eyes narrowing to venomous slits. "Why is she even here?" she hissed, loud enough for everyone to hear. Mr. Harrington continued as if she hadn't spoken. "I leave not wealth, which means nothing without truth, but the key to understanding what has been stolen." From his breast pocket he withdrew a small brass key. Tarnished. Ordinary. Devastating in its familiarity. My heartbeat thundered in my ears as I stared at it. 3 years ago, through the kitchen window of Caitlin's lavish suburban home, I'd watched her bury something in a terracotta flower pot. Her movements had been furtive, defensive, and when I'd casually asked about her gardening later that evening, her explanation dripped with manufactured nonchalance. "Just keeping old junk away from the kids," she'd said with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. I never mentioned seeing the edge of a small brass key disappearing beneath the soil. "Madison Blake," Mr. Harrington said, extending his hand toward me. "This belongs to you now." The room erupted in controlled chaos. Richard muttered something about inappropriate. Derek placed a restraining hand on Caitlin's arm as she half rose from her seat. "This is absurd," Blake said, his voice deadly quiet. "That can't possibly be part of the official will." "I assure you it is," Mr. Harrington replied, unruffled. "Your father added this codicil 6 months ago, properly witnessed and notarized. 6 months ago, when Colton was already bedridden, supposedly barely lucid according to what Blake had told me, yet apparently clear-headed enough to update his will." I reached for the key, my fingers trembling slightly as they closed around the cool metal. It felt heavier than its size suggested, weighted with unspoken accusations. "What does it open?" I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. Mr. Harrington's expression remained professionally blank. Mr. Blake did not share that information with me. Caitlin stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "This is ridiculous. She's trying to manipulate her way into our father's estate even after he—" She stopped herself, something calculating replacing her rage. Blake's hand suddenly covered mine, not in comfort but in warning. His fingers pressed against my palm, trying to force my hand closed around the key to hide it away. "We should discuss this at home," he murmured, his voice pitched for privacy but loud enough for everyone to hear. The perfect concerned husband. I pulled my hand away, clutching the key tightly. The metal bit into my palm, its edges sharp with promise. Across the table, Caitlin's face had drained of color, her usual mask of confidence fractured by something that looked remarkably like fear. As I slipped the key into my pocket, I knew with absolute certainty. This wasn't just an inheritance. This was Colton Blake reaching out from the grave to tell me something they desperately tried to keep buried. This was a challenge, and I was going to accept it. I fled the law office, the key burning a hole in my pocket. Rain pelted my face as I burst through the heavy glass doors, matching the storm raging inside me. The parking lot swam before my eyes, rain or tears, I couldn't tell which, blurring my vision. 3 years ago. That's when the cracks first appeared in what I'd thought was solid ground. It had been late July, the kind of sweltering summer day that makes even breathing feel like work. I'd driven to Caitlin's sprawling Tudor-style home to drop off Blake's forgotten laptop before his business trip. Her silver Range Rover sat in the driveway, so I circled around back, knowing she'd likely be in the kitchen that overlooked her prized garden. That's when I saw her, designer clothes smeared with soil, her perfectly manicured hands filthy as she frantically dug in the large terracotta pot by the back steps. She kept glancing over her shoulder, a lookout without a team. When she finally stood, something small disappeared beneath the fresh layer of soil she patted into place. "Caitlin," I called, making my presence known. She jumped like I'd fired a gun, one hand flying to her throat. "Madison. God, you scared me." The smile she plastered on was as artificial as the flowers in her foyer. Sweat beaded her hairline, unusual for someone who claimed perspiration was beneath her genetic makeup. "Sorry. Just dropping off Blake's laptop." I nodded toward the pot. "New plant." Her laugh came too quickly. "Just reorganizing. Found an old box of Mom's junk in the attic. Sentimental garbage, really, but the kids would just lose it or break it." She brushed dirt from her hands, leaving smudges on her cream linen pants. "Seemed easier to tuck it away out here." Even then, the lie tasted metallic in the air. That evening, I mentioned it to Blake as he packed for his trip. "Your sister was burying something in a flower pot today. Acting weird about it." Blake's laugh was dismissive as he folded his shirts with military precision. "That's just Caitlin being dramatic. Probably hiding expensive jewelry from Derek again. Last month it was her new earrings in the flower container." He zipped his suitcase. "She thinks he's tracking her spending." But something in his too casual tone caught my attention. A false note in a familiar melody. The following week brought the annual company barbecue. Colton had presided over the event like always, charcoal smoke clinging to his signature blue button-down as he flipped burgers with the same focused attention he gave to quarterly reports. I'd been arranging desserts when his heavy hand landed on my shoulder. "Walk with me, Madison," he'd said, not really a request. We'd strolled along the edge of his property, away from the chatter and laughter. Colton had never been one for small talk, so his silence didn't surprise me. What did was the way he studied my face before speaking. "You notice things, don't you?" he'd finally asked. "I try to." "Good." He nodded, satisfied. "Keep your eyes open. You're smarter than they think." At the time I'd felt oddly flattered, taking his words as a rare compliment from a man notoriously stingy with praise. I didn't realize he was warning me. That night, unable to sleep, I'd stepped onto our back porch for fresh air. Voices carried from behind the pool house. Colton and Blake, their shadows elongated in the security lights. "Can't keep doing this," Colton hissed. "It stops now." "You're overreacting," Blake replied, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Everything is handled." "Nothing is handled." Colton's voice rose before dropping dangerously. "You think I don't see what's happening? What you and your sister?" "Keep your voice down," Blake snapped. "Madison might hear." "Maybe she should." Their conversation dissolved into harsh whispers I couldn't catch. The next morning, Colton was gone. Blake explained his father had transferred temporarily to oversee the Seattle branch's restructuring. 3 months later came the heart attack. The funeral. The gradual freezing out as Blake and Caitlin closed ranks, suddenly too busy for family dinners, suddenly needing space to grieve properly. The key nagged at my thoughts. One weekend when Caitlin took the kids to Disney World, I drove to her house with a flimsy excuse ready for Derek. But his car was gone too. Perfect opportunity. I felt ridiculous, like a character in a bad thriller, as I poked around her garden. The large terracotta pot still sat by the steps, now hosting a thriving rosemary plant. I dug carefully, sifting through the soil, but found nothing. The key was gone. For months I convinced myself it was paranoia, that grief was making me create mysteries where none existed. I almost believed it, until today when that same key materialized in the lawyer's hand like a magician's trick. Now, standing in the rain-soaked parking lot, I clutched my purse against my chest, the key safely tucked inside. My car stood at the far end, a lonely silhouette against the darkening sky. I just needed to reach it, to drive somewhere quiet and think. Madison. I hadn't heard Blake follow me outside. He stood a few feet away, raindrops darkening his suit to charcoal, his expression unreadable. "What does that key open?" he asked, his voice deliberately casual. "You tell me," I replied. He took a step closer. "This isn't a game. You don't know what you're doing." A strange calm settled over me then, clarity cutting through confusion. For 3 years I'd been the good wife, accepting explanations that never quite fit, swallowing doubts that kept me awake at night. But now Colton had reached across death itself to hand me the truth. I looked Blake dead in the eye. "No. But you do." Something flickered across his face. Fear, perhaps, or recognition that the rules had changed. He reached for my arm, but I stepped back, maintaining the distance between us. "It's just a key, Madison," he said, his voice softening to the tone he used when he wanted something. "Whatever you think it is, you're wrong. Then you have nothing to worry about." Rain plastered my hair to my face as I turned and walked to my car, feeling his eyes boring into my back. The key pressed against my ribs through the fabric of my purse, no longer just metal but a promise. 3 years ago I'd watched Caitlin bury a secret. Now it was my turn to unearth it, regardless of what lay beneath the surface. Some things once buried refused to stay hidden. I drove aimlessly through rain-slicked streets, streetlights blurring through my windshield. The key sat heavy in my palm at every stoplight, its worn teeth telling secrets I couldn't yet decipher. Where did it lead? What had Colton wanted me to find? The answer hit me as I passed Meridian Bank's downtown branch. 3 years ago, Blake had mentioned his father kept important documents in a safety deposit box there. Old school paranoia, he'd called it with an eye roll. I checked the time, 3:17 p.m. The bank closed at 5. Enough time if I hurried. Meridian's marble-floored lobby echoed with my footsteps as I approached the customer service desk. A young woman with immaculate box braids and a nameplate reading Jessica greeted me with a practiced smile. "I need to access a safety deposit box," I said, placing the key on the counter. My voice sounded foreign to my own ears, calm despite the earthquake in my chest. Of course. Your name and box number. Her fingers hovered over her keyboard. Madison Blake. I don't know the box number, but it would be under Colton Blake Sr. Her smile flickered. Are you listed as an authorized user? I believe so, I lied smoothly. My father-in-law recently passed away. I'm sorry for your loss, she said, the phrase automatic as she typed. Her brow furrowed. There's a box registered solely to Mr. Blake. I'll need to verify your authorization. I produced the portion of the will Mr. Harrington had provided. Article 7 with its cryptic wording and clear bequest of the key. Jessica studied it, uncertainty crossing her features. I'll need to speak with my manager, she said, rising from her seat. While I waited, doubts multiplied. What if the key was a wild goose chase? What if Blake had already emptied the box? If Mrs. Blake. A balding man in his 50s appeared, Jessica trailing behind him. I'm Martin Weber, branch manager. There seems to be some confusion. I straightened my spine. No confusion. My father-in-law left me this key in his will. I believe it's to his safety deposit box here. The box in question is still registered solely to Colton Blake Sr., Weber said, his tone professionally doubtful. Without proper documentation of succession. Like this. I slid Mr. Harrington's card across the counter. Call him. He'll confirm I'm the rightful recipient. Weber's eyes narrowed, but he retreated to his office. 10 minutes later, after what I assumed was a terse conversation with the Blake family attorney, he returned with a different expression. Reluctant compliance. You'll need 2 forms of ID, he said stiffly. After checking my driver's license and passport twice, Weber personally escorted me to the vault. The heavy door swung open with theatrical slowness, revealing walls lined with gleaming metal boxes. Number 713, he announced, stopping before a medium-sized box. I'll give you privacy in the viewing room. The metal box slid from its slot with surprising weight. Weber led me to a small room with a table and chair, then closed the door behind him. Alone at last, I placed the box on the table, inserted the key and turned it. The lock disengaged with a soft click that somehow seemed to echo in the silent room. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. I'd expected papers, files, maybe old photos, the typical contents of a safety deposit box. Instead, I found just 2 items, a stapled set of documents and a check folded around them. I opened the documents first. The heading made my breath catch. Last Will and Testament of Colton James Blake. This wasn't a copy of the will we'd just heard read. The formatting was different, the language more direct. I flipped to the distribution section and froze. 30% of my estate, including liquid assets, property shares and stock holdings, to my daughter-in-law Madison Eleanor Blake. 30%. Not the 0 I'd received today. But what sent ice through my veins was the date at the bottom of the final page. March 17th, exactly 1 month after Colton's death. The date was impossible. The signature was impossible. Yet there it was, above the notary stamp. Colton's distinctive scrawl, the same signature I'd seen countless times on company letterhead. Below it, the notary's signature and stamp belonged to Patricia Winters, Caitlin's college roommate who'd gone into legal services. And beside that, a witness signature I recognized instantly, Caitlin's sharp, angular handwriting. The same handwriting I'd watched forge excuses for Blake during our college years when he skipped family functions he found boring. With shaking fingers, I unfolded the check wrapped around the will. Made out to me for an amount that made my eyes widen, $4.7 million. Dated 2 days after the forged will. Signed with Colton's signature, but in the same ink as the notary stamp. Same handwriting as the witness line. The truth assembled itself like puzzle pieces locking together. Caitlin had created a fake amended will and a fake payout check. She'd never intended for either to be discovered. Just buried, literally, as evidence that I'd already received my inheritance should the original will ever surface. But Colton had outplayed her from beyond the grave. Somehow he'd known what they would do. He'd secured the original key, then made sure it would find its way to me through channels they couldn't manipulate. I slumped back in the chair, mind racing. This wasn't just about money. The original will, the real one read today, had specifically called me the woman my son betrayed. Not his daughter-in-law. Not Madison. A pointed, public declaration that something was fundamentally wrong. My phone buzzed with an incoming call. Blake. I silenced it, then carefully photographed every page of the forged will and the fraudulent check. Evidence. Protection. As I returned everything to the box, questions churned beneath my shock. What betrayal had Colton referenced? What had Blake and Caitlin done that was worth committing fraud to cover up? And why had Colton trusted me, the outsider, the afterthought, to uncover it all? I locked the safety deposit box and composed myself before stepping out. Weber waited, his expression a mix of curiosity and discomfort. "Find what you were looking for, Mrs. Blake?" he asked. I managed a small smile. More than I expected. Walking out of the bank into the fading afternoon light, I felt irrevocably changed. The naive woman who had accepted years of subtle dismissals and convenient explanations had disappeared, replaced by someone with evidence of criminal activity committed by her own husband and sister-in-law. My phone buzzed again. 7 missed calls from Blake, 3 from Caitlin. I switched it to silent and slipped it back into my purse. They knew I had the key. They didn't know I'd found its lock. For the first time in years, I held a power they couldn't anticipate or control. Whatever game they'd been playing, I just changed the rules. I needed space to think, somewhere Blake wouldn't immediately look for me. Driving aimlessly through downtown, I found myself turning toward Riverside Park, the place where, ironically, Blake had proposed 5 years ago. Now it seemed fitting to unravel our marriage where it had officially begun. The rain had stopped, leaving the air heavy with moisture and the walking paths deserted. I sat on a bench overlooking the river's churning current, my mind traveling back to when I'd first stepped into the Blake family orbit. 7 years ago. Fresh out of college with my business degree, I'd landed a coveted summer internship at Blake Industries. I'd been assigned to the product development team, my enthusiasm probably painful to watch. On my 3rd day, I'd literally bumped into Colton Blake Sr. while carrying an armful of sample materials, sending everything scattering across the hallway floor. Instead of the irritation I'd expected, he'd knelt down to help me gather the samples, examining each with genuine interest. "Good eye for materials," he'd commented, holding up a textile swatch. "The team needs someone who pays attention to details." That brief interaction had somehow turned into weekly check-ins. Colton would stop by my workspace, asking pointed questions about my observations of company operations, customer feedback patterns, inefficiencies I'd noticed. "You've got grit," he told me once. Not afraid to say the uncomfortable thing. "We need that." Blake noticed me around the same time, though in a completely different way. While his father saw my analytical mind, Blake saw, what? Challenge? A conquest? He'd appeared at my desk with coffee, invited me to team lunches, casually mentioned gallery openings and restaurant recommendations. I'd been flattered, of course. Blake had that effortless confidence of someone who'd never questioned his place in the world. His attention felt like validation, proof I belonged in this glossy corporate environment despite my community college start and scholarship-patched education. Our courtship had been a whirlwind. Weekend getaways on the company jet. Champagne picnics arranged by his assistant. A proposal at sunset in Riverside Park, with a photographer hidden in the bushes to capture the moment for social media. I'd said yes without hesitation, intoxicated by what I thought was love. The wedding was featured in regional business magazines, not because I was anybody but because the Blake name carried weight. Strategic alliance. I'd overheard one board member joke at the reception. I'd laughed it off then. The shift came so gradually I barely noticed at first. 2 weeks after returning from our honeymoon, Blake suggested I transfer to the administrative division. "You'll have direct exposure to executive decision-making," he'd explained. "Better advancement opportunities." Instead, I found myself coordinating office parties, managing the charity foundation, and handling special projects that amounted to busy work. My product development insights were reduced to suggestions that never made it past email drafts. Caitlin's role in my sidelining became increasingly clear. Though her official title was VP of Special Projects, she functionally controlled the financial operations of the company. Madison's organizing the holiday party. She'd announce in meetings where I'd prepared to discuss market analytics. She's got such a knack for those things. The first time it happened, I'd waited for Blake to correct her, to remind everyone of my actual responsibilities. Instead, he'd smiled encouragingly. She really does. Later, when I confronted him privately, his response was always the same. Caitlin's sensitive about her position. Just keep the peace. Family dynamics are complicated. Family. That was the weapon they wielded most effectively. I wasn't really family, just an accessory to it. Every time I pushed back, I became the problem, the outsider who didn't understand how things worked. Even Colton's attitude toward me changed. The mentorship cooled, our conversations shortened, his questions about my observations stopped entirely. I'd catch him watching me sometimes with an unreadable expression before turning away. I learned later from Blake's executive assistant that he'd been telling his father I was struggling with the financial aspects of the foundation, that donors had complained about my unprofessional attitude, that I'd misallocated funds designated for specific programs. All lies, but by the time I realized what was happening, the damage was done. The warmth in Colton's eyes had been replaced by cautious distance. Or so I thought. Now, sitting in the park where I'd once envisioned a fairy tale future, everything looked different. The forged will and check revealed a conspiracy I was only beginning to understand. But they also proved something critical. Colton had never actually believed Blake's lies about me. He must have discovered their deception. Must have realized they were systematically undermining me, isolating me from any real authority or influence within the company. The question was why? What threat did I pose to Blake and Caitlin that required such elaborate containment? A memory surfaced. From 2 years into our marriage, during a rare dinner with just Colton and me. Blake had been delayed at a meeting, and his father had asked about my original department. "Do you miss product development?" he'd asked, swirling his whiskey. "Sometimes," I'd admitted. I had ideas for the Sustainable Materials Initiative that never got implemented. His eyes had sharpened with interest. Like what? For 30 minutes, I'd outlined my research on biodegradable packaging alternatives that could reduce production costs by nearly 22% while addressing growing consumer environmental concerns. Colton had listened intently, asking specific questions about implementation timelines and supplier relationships. The conversation ended abruptly when Blake arrived, but the next day, Colton had requested the foundation's financial records for review. A week later, Blake suggested I focus exclusively on event planning rather than financial management. They'd been afraid. Not of me specifically, but of what Colton might see in me, potential. A trustworthy ally. Someone who prioritized the company's long-term health over short-term gains. As the sun began to set over the river, casting long shadows across the park, I pulled out my phone and finally checked my messages. 27 missed calls. 15 texts demanding to know where I was. 2 voicemails from Caitlin, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. The last text from Blake read simply, "Whatever you think you know, you don't. Come home so we can talk." But home wasn't home anymore. It was the elaborate stage set where I'd performed the role of supportive wife while being systematically stripped of voice and agency. And now, finally, I understood the most important line from Colton's will. "To the woman my son betrayed." The betrayal wasn't infidelity or a single act of deception. It was the methodical dismantling of my potential, my confidence, my place in a company where I'd once been valued for my mind rather than my marriageability. Colton hadn't just left me a key. He'd left me a mission, to reclaim what had been taken and expose the rot within his own blood. I couldn't go home, not to the pristine mansion that had never truly felt like mine. Instead, I drove to the airport Marriott and paid cash for a room. Anonymous. Untraceable. I needed a clear head to plan my next move. By morning I had my strategy. Blake's manipulation relied on isolation, keeping me separated from allies, from information, from power. I would do the opposite. Make everything public. Bring it all into the light. My first stop was a small forensic document examination office tucked between a tax service and a bail bonds agency downtown. The examiner, a former FBI specialist named Eleanor Grantham, took one look at my photos of the forged will and check and raised an eyebrow. "Amateur hour," she commented, adjusting her magnifying equipment. "Good enough to fool a casual observer, but not a professional." 3 hours and an expedited fee later, I had a preliminary report detailing 5 distinct indicators of forgery, including inconsistent pressure points in the signatures, ink discrepancies, and evidence of traced lettering. Eleanor promised a comprehensive official report within 48 hours. Next, I visited James Wilson, a semi-retired attorney who had worked with Colton's father decades ago. He'd maintained a small practice specializing in corporate governance disputes, and most importantly had no ties to Blake's hand-picked legal team. Wilson's office was a throwback to another era, wood paneling, leather-bound law books, and not a minimalist piece of furniture in sight. He listened without interruption as I laid out my evidence, spreading the photos and forensic report across his cluttered desk. When I finished, the silence stretched uncomfortably long. Wilson removed his glasses, polishing them deliberately before responding. "This could be criminal," he said finally, his voice carrying the weight of 40 years in law. "Forgery, fraud, probate violations." He fixed me with a penetrating stare. "Do you want to press charges?" The question momentarily stunned me. Criminal charges meant police reports, court appearances, media coverage. Meant the Blake name, my name, splashed across headlines. "No," I decided. "Not yet. I don't want jail time. I want the truth." Wilson nodded slowly. "Then what do you want?" "A reckoning," I replied, the word tasting strange but right on my tongue. "Public acknowledgement of what they did." Over the next 2 days, Wilson and I constructed our approach. Blake Industries' bylaws included a provision allowing any shareholder with relevant concerns to call an emergency meeting. As Colton's legitimate heir mentioned in the original will, I qualified. I sent the formal request through Wilson, citing urgent governance concerns related to the execution of the founder's estate. The corporate secretary couldn't refuse without risking liability. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday at 2 p.m., less than a week after the will reading. I spent the intervening days gathering my evidence, preparing my statement, and ignoring the increasingly frantic messages from Blake. He veered between concern, "I'm worried about you," anger, "You're being incredibly immature," and manipulation, "My father wouldn't want the company damaged by misunderstandings." Thursday arrived with stomach-churning swiftness. I dressed with deliberate care, a charcoal gray suit I'd worn to my first executive presentation years ago before being sidelined. My armor. Blake Industries headquarters dominated the downtown skyline, its glass facade reflecting clouds and ambition in equal measure. I'd once felt pride walking through those automatic doors. Today I felt something closer to righteous fury. The boardroom occupied the entire top floor with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the city Colton had helped build. I arrived 15 minutes early but not early enough. Caitlin already sat at the head of the table, Colton's chair, reviewing papers with affected nonchalance. Blake stood behind her, hands clasped behind his back, a portrait of corporate confidence. Their body language screamed united front. 8 board members sat in various states of confusion and irritation. Emergency meetings were rare and inconvenient. Good. I wanted them uncomfortable. "Madison," Blake said smoothly as I entered, as if we'd bumped into each other at a charity gala. "Glad you could join us." I didn't respond. Instead, I placed my portfolio on the table and began distributing copies of my evidence packet. One by one, the board members accepted the folders with expressions ranging from curiosity to suspicion. "What exactly are we discussing?" asked Richard Morris, the longest-serving board member and Colton's closest friend on the executive team. I took a steadying breath and opened my folder. "This is what your founder left for me," I said, my voice stronger than I'd expected. "After his death, this was buried, literally, along with a forged payout designed to silence me." The room fell silent as I walked them through the evidence methodically. The original will. The safety deposit box. The forged amended will with its impossible date. Check. The forensic report confirming Caitlin's handwriting. "You'll notice on page 4, I continued, the notary stamp belongs to Patricia Winters. She's currently under investigation by the state licensing board for multiple irregularities. She's also, coincidentally, Caitlin's former roommate." I watched their faces as understanding dawned. Confusion gave way to shock, then to the dawning horror of realization. Morton Fielding, the CFO, removed his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose. Diane Levesque, head of legal, was already taking furious notes, her expression glacial. Caitlin's face had transformed from confident to corpse-like, blood draining visibly with each new piece of evidence. Blake maintained his composure, but the muscle twitching in his jaw betrayed his panic. This is absurd, Caitlin finally snapped, standing so abruptly her chair tipped backward. That's not legal. It's fake. She's the one committing fraud. Her voice echoed in the suddenly silent room. Every eye turned from her to the documents, then back to her flushed face. From the doorway, a new voice entered the conversation. The notary commission number on this document was suspended 3 months ago for fraudulent activities. James Wilson stood there, phone in hand. I've just gotten off the phone with the Secretary of State's office. They've confirmed Patricia Winter's stamp was invalidated following multiple complaints of improperly notarized documents. He approached the table, placing his phone down like another piece of evidence. They're quite interested in this new example. As is the probate court. Caitlin's face contorted. You have no right. I have every right, I interrupted, surprised by my own calm. Just as your father had every right to leave me 30% of his company. Blake finally spoke, his voice low and dangerous. Madison, you don't understand what you're doing. I understand perfectly, I replied, meeting his gaze directly. I'm doing exactly what Colton would have wanted. Exposing the truth. In that moment, as the board members examined the evidence with increasing concern and Caitlin's composure crumbled completely, I felt an odd sense of vindication. This wasn't about money or revenge. It was about honesty. About consequences. It was about fulfilling the trust Colton had placed in me when he left me that key and set this reckoning in motion. The days following the boardroom revelation unfolded like a corporate thriller. Security escorted Caitlin from the building that very afternoon, her personal items later delivered in bankers' boxes. Blake managed a more dignified exit, citing family matters requiring immediate attention, in a company-wide email that conspicuously avoided mentioning the emergency board meeting. For a moment I stood in the eye of the hurricane. Interim leadership needed direction. Employees whispered in break rooms. Clients called with concerns. The company Colton had built with decades of hard work teetered on the precipice of a public relations disaster. I hadn't wanted this responsibility, but I wouldn't shrink from it either. For 2 weeks I inhabited Colton's office, the space still bearing subtle traces of his presence. A collection of geological specimens on the bookshelf, the slight indentation in the leather chair, the faint scent of his sandalwood aftershave that somehow lingered. The first week brought Blake's campaign of reconciliation. It began with flowers. Massive arrangements delivered hourly until I instructed security to refuse them. Then came the texts, evolving from terse demands to syrupy apologies. We need to talk. This isn't what my father would have wanted. You're making a mistake. I was protecting the company. I was protecting you. I miss you. I still love you. When I continued ignoring him, he appeared at the office, somehow charming his way past the front desk. I looked up to find him lounging in the visitor's chair across from what had been his father's desk, as if this were a casual drop-by. This has gone far enough, Maddie, he said, using the nickname I'd always disliked. It's Madison, I corrected, continuing to review the quarterly projections without looking up. And you shouldn't be here. It's still my company. 25% of it is, I agreed. Which doesn't grant access privileges after the board voted to suspend your management role. His carefully constructed charm cracked, revealing the entitlement beneath. This is just money, he snapped. Why are you being so dramatic? The question was so absurd I finally looked up. It was never about money, Blake. It was about trust shattered. Stolen. Legacy twisted to erase me. Caitlin's idea. He tried shifting tactics. The forgery, the buried key, all her. And you just happened to benefit? You just happened to go along with it? You just happened to start feeding your father lies about me right when he was getting suspicious. I shook my head. You're not a passive character in someone else's story, Blake. You made choices. Security arrived then, responding to the silent alarm I'd triggered under the desk. Blake's face as they escorted him out, disbelief morphing into comprehension that his world had irrevocably changed, would stay with me long after. Caitlin's approach differed in style but matched in desperation. After her initial rage came calculated manipulation. She arrived at my hotel with tears and a story about Blake coercing her, about fearing for her children's inheritance, about making one terrible mistake. When that failed, she pivoted to threats. About what she knew, what she could reveal, what she might do. We thought you'd leave anyway, she said during her final attempt, her composure slipping. You were never meant to be permanent. The casual cruelty of it struck me like a physical blow. In their eyes, I had always been temporary. A convenience, an accessory, never truly part of the legacy they believed was their birthright alone. By the third week I had made my decision. I called a formal board meeting and arrived with a proposal my lawyers had carefully drafted. The room felt different this time. Respect had replaced suspicion, attention had replaced dismissal. I'll sell my 30% stake in Blake Industries, I announced, under one non-negotiable condition. Neither Blake nor Caitlin may hold any management position within the company or its subsidiaries, now or in the future. The reaction was immediate. Murmurs, exchanged glances, raised eyebrows. Richard Morris leaned forward. That's a significant demand, Madison. It's a significant stake, I countered. And a significant betrayal that endangered this company's reputation and integrity. Deliberations lasted hours. Financial considerations weighed against ethical ones. Legal implications against practical realities. In the end, pragmatism won out. The whispers of forgery and fraud had already reached major clients. Investors were skittish about potential scandal. The company needed stability, not protracted internal warfare. When the vote came, it was unanimous. The board accepted my terms. I kept Colton's chair warm just long enough to appoint someone who respected the legacy. Janet Winters, a brilliant operations director who had been consistently overlooked for promotion during Blake's tenure. I remembered Colton mentioning her potential years ago, before his opinion of me supposedly changed. Her strategic vision and ethical backbone were exactly what the company needed. My final acts included establishing a scholarship foundation for business students from disadvantaged backgrounds and creating an anonymous whistleblower system to prevent future abuses of power. Small tributes to the man who had recognized something in me worth nurturing, worth trusting even when his own children didn't. I signed the final paperwork on a Tuesday morning in early autumn. No press release, no interview, no victory lap. Just the quiet satisfaction of completing what Colton had started. I walked out of the headquarters without looking back, the weight of the past month finally lifting from my shoulders. On my way home, not to the mansion I'd shared with Blake, but to a modest lakeside cabin I'd secretly purchased with part of my settlement, I made one final detour. Caitlin's house stood empty, a for sale sign swaying gently in the front yard. Financial fallout perhaps, or simply too many ghosts. I paused by the garden where, 3 years ago, I'd watched her bury that pivotal key. The large terracotta flower pot still sat by the steps, but now it was cracked down the side, neglected flowers spilling out like secrets escaping confinement. Nature reclaiming what had been unnaturally constrained. Standing there, I felt an unexpected sense of peace wash over me. The key Caitlin had buried thinking it would forever hide her deception had instead unlocked my freedom. It had given me exactly what they had tried to steal. My name, my worth, and my place in the world. I smiled, turned away, and drove toward the future Colton had somehow known I deserved. One unburdened by manipulations and lies, one where I determined my own value. Some betray. Some bury. Some, like Colton Blake Sr., believe in justice even from beyond the grave. And some, like me, finally learn to trust themselves more than the people who claim to love them. If this story of sweet revenge had you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button right now. My favorite part was when Madison walked into that boardroom with all the evidence, watching Caitlin's face drain of color as she realized her scheme was exposed. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Was it the will reading when Madison received the mysterious key? Or maybe when she discovered the forged documents in the safety deposit box? Don't miss more thrilling stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.